Hello, everyone. My name is Berit Anderson, and I have the good fortune to be born into all of this, as well as the gene pool, which is no small thing. And I'm here today with Ragnar Kruse, who is the co-founder and CEO of Smaato, which is a mobile ad platform that uses real-time bidding, as well as Steele, Contorer, who is the founder and CEO of Everyone Counts, which I hope you had the chance to hear about earlier. We'll be talking a little bit more about it in just a few minutes. But they're doing really amazing things, digitizing voting using software as a service. So earlier today, we had the good fortune to hear from Michael Dell. And he said some really interesting things about the transition from private to public, back to private. But one of the things that he said that really stuck out for me was the fact that their PC industry is the strongest it's been since 2006. And Ragnar actually came to me after that and had done a little digging. And it turns out that when you're looking at the computer industry in general, PCs in 2013 there were about 300 million units sold. When you look at mobile units, that number jumps to 1.8 billion. And when you look at just smartphones within the mobile sector, it's a full 1 billion. And that's worldwide. So it's a huge industry with a huge reach. And we are here today to talk about that a little bit more. And I was hoping we could just start out by talking about the industry generally. So obviously, there's a lot going on there. It's spread out globally. Where can we expect to see things going in the next 5 years? How much more will it grow? And in what demographics?
Go ahead. Yeah. Actually, I think mobile is still growing very largely. I know here in the audience we have someone from Telstra and from some of the carriers. It's a $1 trillion industry already. I think the big shift what we're seeing is that those mobile devices are little computing devices, and everyone going forward has one of those computing devices in their pocket. In the Western countries, and we are here in the US, we're on the West Coast, we always kind of forget we might have 3, 4 different screens, but in a lot of other countries, emerging markets, it's the only mobile device. So when you go, last week I was in Singapore, now of course that's highly developed, but when you go to some countries like Malaysia, Jakarta, and Indonesia next to this, you see a lot of people just with one device with larger screen devices. And that's a big shift, but it also creates, of course, a big opportunity, because this means that we have today a population of, I think, 7.1 billion people on the world. We have an installed base of 1.6 billion smartphones. I just also looked it up. Yeah. But it's interesting is last year 1 billion smartphones were sold. So that number is still growing. That means we have a larger and larger population which now has smartphones and has access to the internet, has access to information, and we can reach them. So it's still growing. There are other interesting numbers also about it is when it comes to smartphones, it's the use of apps. There's just came a ComScore research out which said actually that apps, first of all, smartphones and tablets are more used in the US than PCs, time spent, and that on tablets and smartphones, about 85% of the usage is within apps. Now, where is it going? Last year, about 60 billion apps were downloaded worldwide. This year, it will be about 100 billion, going to 2017 to about 270 billion. These are, I think, Gartner numbers. So it's still growing very fast. Adoption is coming. And so clearly, what we're seeing is not only that, we talked about the internet earlier and the 40 years of internet now, it's the infrastructure is there to access the internet. More and more larger portions of the worldwide population are able now to access the internet. Plus, we are able to reach them through those devices.
Will there be a saturation point, do you think, ever? Or is the lifespan too short?
7.1 billion, I think, is the saturation point.
Right, or maybe twice that.
Yes, but also what's interesting is when we started our company in 2005, there were 20 million smartphones sold, and when you look at the price points, those price points have really come down. I think an iPhone BOM build of material is about $100, and you can find Android devices, larger screen Android devices in Asia for $50, $60 already. That allows we don't need to talk about the $100 computer anymore. There were big efforts to bring this into the different markets for education and so on. So now the price points have come down,
right.
And therefore...
And your computer is in your pocket.
Yes, so it's foreseeable that over the next years, a larger and larger population of the world now, not just in Western countries, will have those devices in their hands and will use them.
So what about, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, Lori, but what about wearables? I mean, there's a lot of hype around them, especially in the US because they're the cool new thing, but how are they actually playing out on a global field?
So before we go to the wearables, I want to address one of the questions you asked earlier about demographics.
Sure.
So I agree with everything you said. It's data that makes a ton of sense, and we're seeing it happen. But with demographics, there seems to be a difference. And I'm speaking now from the perspective of someone who runs a software-based voting company, because PCs and mobile and all devices that you can access the internet from are our voting machines, are our voting registration systems. So the data has been really important. In the beginning of my business, where we were using software-based voting systems, everyone was thinking PCs, and everyone was afraid of security because it's internet and PCs. And people were concerned about the digital divide. And that is a very different perspective than what we're seeing with mobile now. Mm-hmm. As you look at, so internet access in the United States is up to 85%, and 15% of people just say they don't bother, and they don't care, and they don't want to. But if you go to the mobile device side, and there was a big thing about the digital divide, and it's rich white men with PCs, but with mobile devices, and specifically smartphones, the majority of owners of mobile devices are minorities and women, which was a surprise to me for smartphones. But
that's true globally?
The data came from Pew Charitable Trust, and it was about the US, so I'm not sure that it's true globally. But it's a good question. And I think what's interesting is it's also primarily their main internet connectivity.
Right.
So there is a switch to who's using and what, but what it's doing basically is increasing access to data across the globe to all populations.
Yeah. Plus, to really add, I think with the smartphones, we've seen the touch screen, the swiping, much more intuitive. Mm-hmm. I have a mother-in-law, 78 years old, using the internet, Facebook every day. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a big change. Using a computer still is for large parts of the population complicated to use, but those smartphones, tablets, it's so easy to use, so automatically the adoption is much higher, and basically everyone is able to use it.
Do we see that playing out in the app marketplace yet, in terms of, are we seeing more women, maybe more people of color becoming publishers and creators of content?
I don't have the data on that. I think it's an interesting point. If it's on both sides, I presume so, but I don't know that.
I think also trends and kind of observations there is, with the smartphones and smartphone adoption, with Apple and also with Android, we have those app stores. And I've been 30 years in IT, and always one of the problems was always distribution. With electronic goods and with those app stores, you have a global distribution of content, which really also means is, and again, digital divide, you don't need to be in the US to actually be successful with any kind of apps.
Right.
You basically can create wherever you are some content, put it into the app store, and make money. There are enough success stories. There's Flappy Birds, the one or the other has heard about. There are lots of examples where someone has created and came from any kind of country and became successful. Though this kind of distribution wasn't there, and that just creates much more opportunities, and more will pick up and will leverage that.
So Ragnar, you maybe were a little bit early to the mobile ad party. You started your company, how long, 6 years ago?
2005.
So, and then in the last 2 years, you've really seen everyone else kind of get their stuff together and hop on board that same train to mix just like 40 metaphors at once. What is it about the mobile industry how has that changed the ad industry?
Yeah. So when we started, and I remember, I think we were first time here at FiRe, I think 2007. Yeah. Year earlier? Okay, 2006. And I remember I also was on stage and telling smartphones are coming and this is going to happen. The nice thing it actually happened 2 years later. So I was a little early. At that time, mobile advertising was nearly zero. The only thing was like SMS advertising. That has completely shifted. It's this year, last year it was an $18 billion industry. This year it's a $30 billion industry. Yeah, so it's significant now. Of course, the largest player is Google, probably covering 50% of the market. Facebook came a little late or early, wherever we believe the industry is, but it's still growing fast. And Facebook, I think last report was like $1 billion in a single quarter on mobile. So it's growing now really rapidly. I think what is interesting is that now there's more and more technology which allows to really leverage the possibilities on mobile to do much more, much better targeting. Mm-hmm. And that gets leveraged through more and more what's called real-time bidding. And that allows that if you're an app developer and you sell and you want to monetize through advertising, you basically can offer to everyone, you can advertise through an auctioning model. You're able to slice and dice the inventory, which also allows that you actually achieve much higher price points than you normally did in any kind of advertising. Through this, what really happens, and there are benefits to kind of everyone, but that's a huge trend. It started really in online 3-4 years ago, has been growing heavily, first in the US, now going in more and more countries. Same happening in mobile, really started the last 2 years. And that means for any app developer, for any mobile publisher, they're able to make more money with higher what's called eCPMs. That's the average price per what's called impression ad displayed. And at the same time, advertisers really can focus the 25 to 30-year-old male and with a certain household income and so on, because that's also, it's a much more personal device.
Right.
Which also means the end user gets much more
they get what they want.
Targeted advertising. Yes.
So have we gotten to the point where we're walking by McDonald's and all of a sudden a Big Mac advertisement pops up on our phone yet?
I wouldn't suggest this, but it might happen. This is one portion. I think what needs to be seen is if you target, you have a few users you're able to really reach. There are large retailers who actually do this, who have specifically here in the US, who have lots of stores.
Right.
They do this kind of location-based targeting. If it pops up, I think from the user experience, nobody really wants it. There are smarter ways to really do it.
Yeah. So Larry, let's talk about you. Or I should say your company. Your software has been used internationally in elections. It's also been used locally. Oregon had the first iPad election in 2011. How has the going mobile enabled you to have enough security to make this a reality?
So that's mobile is definitely transforming the elections industry. It's not necessarily the security, although that's a part of it, but what it actually is the perception. And so we started Everyone Counts to bring software-based voting to governments in 2004. And there was a fear at the time of the internet. There was a fear of security. There was the digital divide. There was, as you pointed out, difficulty with people that weren't used to using PCs. While we made a lot of progress doing online voting and doing some voting for the most severely disenfranchised using PCs, when we did the election in 2011 in Oregon, where people with disabilities were able to vote on an iPad, it changed everything. Global media, we were on New York Times and MSNBC and the International Herald Tribune, and the headlines were all iPad voting changes democracy. So what's interesting to me is I was asked the question on MSNBC and they said, so why is iPad voting so good? And I said, it's not. Software as a service-based voting is good and we're hardware agnostic. But because iPad got the headlines, everyone was talking about it. And suddenly we're getting calls left and right from people who said they were afraid of technology and afraid of digital elections, going, can I do iPad voting too? So it's not really that necessarily, I mean, it was a web-based solution, so it's not that it was more secure than voting on a PC would have been, it's that it was sexier. And so that got people talking about it, and they started thinking less about security, although we didn't. We continued to think about state-of-the-art security and state-of-the-art accessibility. But the mobile revolution is taking all the work we did getting people ready to move away from purpose-built hardware, which is also sort of what's happened in every other industry that's adopted mobile and or the internet. The hardware is no longer, and Michael Dell was talking about it this morning in the networking world. It's not about expensive one-off hardware that only does one thing anymore. It's about a lot of software coming together, and that is mobile. And so that is actually transforming. Now everybody in the United States and abroad also, but specifically in the United States, $3.9 billion was spent on purpose-built hardware for voting from 2000 to 2006. So as that reaches its life expectancy, which is now, reaches its end of life, customers are looking and saying, why would I do that again? Why would I spend money on hardware? And they're skipping right over the PC idea and going straight to mobile. So we are actually implementing tablet voting in poll stations across the United States, and we expect we'll do the same thing internationally.
So what kind of security are you using? I mean, I know it doesn't matter, but...
No, it totally matters, yes. So, well, we think it's really important. So our ballots are all encrypted using 2048-bit encryption. But interestingly, we were talking about fraud earlier, and I think this jumps right into that. So technology is really, really important for security, and using the state-of-the-art, what we call military-grade security is really important in something like an election, but also in commerce and everything else. And so if you look at fraud or hacking or corruption, a large percentage of it comes from human error or human intentional breaking of something. And so, someone intentionally, thinking of Snowden, so somebody intentionally decided to do something. It's not that the security was broken, it's that the person with the inside track decided to do it. So we need to have, with secure mobile applications like voting and commerce and everything else, we need to have not just the state-of-the-art internet security, the state-of-the-art mobile security, but also state-of-the-art human processes for security.
And clearly they don't have those hanging, what was
No
it?
hanging pixels.
Yes.
Hanging chads are no longer a thing of the future. That's right.
Great use case, I think, really for mobile and leveraging mobile.
So if we look at, I think you two are both in an interesting space, because Lori, on your side, this kind of acceptability of mobile has really driven a lot of what you're doing, and Ragnar, for you, the proliferation of data about customers is really driving a lot of what you're doing. What are the other drivers out there that are helping other industries kind of establish themselves or find their way?
I always see it first really as kind of infrastructure. And you asked earlier also about wearables. I think internet, smartphones, they are a new infrastructure which now allows to do anything on top, if it's apps or if you add wearables. I would doubt that every wearable has a SIM card or actually connects directly to the internet, just because of even cost effects and so on. So the smartphone, again, is a hub, and therefore connects to the internet and then allows, if it's Bluetooth, if it's NFC, if it's different mechanics, to then connect to the smartphone and then connect to the internet. So I think what we're seeing is the same way as you leverage the mobile phone for elections, because it's an infrastructure which is easy accessible, it's easy to use. We will see more and more companies who actually come, if it's in enterprise, if it's consumers, coming up with solutions. By the way, one very good example from last year is a gaming company, King.com, Candy Crush. Who knows Candy Crush? Not very many, but they did last year.
You guys need to spend more time playing mobile games.
It's a game, and they did $1.8 billion in revenue last year with, I think, a profit of $800 million and went public. And I saw their last quarter report. I think now they're on $800 million per quarter. So just another example where basically it was an online company then going mobile. We will see. I predict that the same as eBay and Amazon in the 90s just kind of started and now are large players in their industries, we will see new players coming to the market, leveraging mobile and become really large players on mobile.
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of games, we've seen a lot of healthcare companies that are really taking advantages of mobile. Are there other industries that you two see as promising or exciting?
So I think what I've been seeing is that most industries have already begun to go mobile, and that's actually what's helping our industry. I think government is a late adopter, and so you see medical and you see commerce and all these things that are mission critical, and you see aerospace. What I think is an interesting change, game changer again, is not so much industry, but application, and that's going to be authentication. I think if you look at, so voters are obviously always authenticated. Right now, because software-based voting is not yet the norm, but it will be within this decade, authentication is simply what is currently in place. So it's a username, it's a password. Whatever is required by the law is what we use to authenticate a voter. So if it's a driver's license state, it's your driver's license, or it's your social security. So it's really pins and passwords. But as we move forward, you think of the thumb authentication on an iPhone and other devices. If you've actually got that with you, or you can put it on any of the apps, which you can, then you can start being more creative. You can do two-factor authentication by getting a PIN to your mobile device, and we use that for elections as well. But I think the idea of authentication actually being the real holy grail of what's going to make all this work, it's not yet, but it will be.
But actually, every mobile phone has a SIM card. So basically, it can be used for authentication. In most of the Western countries, normally you need to register even with your passport. So therefore, it's verified information to actually get a SIM card and then being able to use a phone. So you already have some parts which are necessary for the authentication. I don't need to go to a bank, how it's done in Europe, for example, or to a post office to actually verify myself. I'm already verified when I use a certain SIM card. I was verified through the carrier. So these are important steps to, I know those were topics and might kick into those kind of CTO discussions, what you can implement and combine with authentication. And then you might have PIN through SMS, for example, verified, so that you know this is really the user who has been authenticated and where we have the data. And that's the first step then to do any kind of even transactions.
So we have about 4.5 minutes left. So if anyone wants to ask a question, now would be a good time to start lining up. And before we get to that, just ask one last question, which is, so we're looking at all of these new kinds of authentication, retina scans and fingerprints. Are we going to start seeing, what kind of new fraud are we going to see as a result of this? Will we have to watch out when we're walking down the street so that someone doesn't steal our eye imprint or, fingerprint this chair after I'm sitting in it?
Well, I think it's interesting because it's again, like you said, the CTO thing. It's about privacy versus security, and that's always a continuum, just like accessibility versus security. And fortunately, with mobile, your device is usually with you, different than with PCs or other devices where you left it when you left the house or left the office. So it'll probably be a little less of an issue, but it's certainly going to become a very important thing to think about.
Yeah. And there's a big danger, of course, because apps, for example, have much more access to the phone and the content of the phone. But Apple and Google have done already a good job on managing that, and they approve all those apps. So they catch a lot on that. That's a clear danger. But I think the industry has done some self-regulation already to make sure that those things can't happen as often. And fraud is everywhere. I mean, there's always someone who tries to trick the system.
All right, looks like we have a few. Go
This
ahead.
is Václav for Lori. Question. Can I ask, how big is your company?
Right now, we're only 50 people, so we have a
50
lot of
people.
growing to do.
So how many millions in revenue?
That I can't say.
Okay, no, my point is that NSA, with all their budgets, they couldn't secure the data, right? And you were talking about the insider information. Target or Target, depends on your pronunciation.
Yeah.
They cannot secure the data. So how your 50-person company can even remotely claim that we can trust you with the data?
It's really important, and it's a question
because
that
you have absolutely no way to secure the data with 50 people.
Well, that's actually not true.
Okay.
So
Please talk.
It's part. Well, first, as I said, multiple levels of security. So not just encrypting the ballots, but access to elections and keeping the election administration separate from the voting. And so there are lots of process steps as well as security steps, and not just in the application in the software, but also on the server side. So first, we think a lot about technical security. Then we think a lot about human security, because truly the vast majority of fraud is by someone doing something wrong. So our people have security checks, and we have checks and balances within each section of our company. It's important to us that we raise the bar for security in elections, and that we continue to do so as time goes on. We actually have about 9 months of attempted hacking every year on our system to make sure we're perpetually state of the art. So it's a combination of human practices and technology practices.
But who's auditing that? Because again,
Outside auditors.
Private company, and we have zero visibility. You don't even share the revenue. So how do we know that the system which you're using is secure?
All of our customers have the ability, we believe in transparency in elections, so all of our customers have the ability to use anyone they want to audit the code. We often have our software audited and locked down. It was always audited and locked down before an election, and then customers have the right to come in and have anyone they want to come in, be it a white hat hacker or an auditing firm, and we've been audited by the majority of the big auditing firms, and take a snapshot of the code during an election, and then again after the election. So multiple levels.
Don't give her such a hard time. Can it get worse than we've seen it here at the elections before?
Right, it's far
Hanging
better.
ballots and
Yeah.
recount and taking on forever? Sorry.
Thank you.
Tries to get the perfect system.
All right, we have about 10
I hope
seconds
we
left.
get
If
some
you wanna
answers
do-
on Friday.
Bill Harris, that was a good question. He beat me to it, but I have a question. Should I be worried about my bank account? They're not nearly as authenticating conscious as you are, seems to me.
Yes.
If you don't
When I
trust
go to an ATM, when I go to an ATM machine, I get
As a
nervous.
It's actually, when it comes to credit card fraud, there's more fraud at the point of sale than basically online. And this has been for the last 15 years. So basically that means is, if you don't trust it, just use it the old way. But the probability is that there's less fraud if you do it online.
All right, we have to get off the stage. Or
Thank
I'm
you
going to be
very
in big trouble with my dad.
One more question or no? Okay.